Cool. Okay, great. So, hello everyone. Hope you've been having a great EthCC. So, first of all, thank you to, Jerome for organizing such a lovely event and constantly figuring out how to do it very well in a new city for a couple of years in a row. Thank you to everyone who made this event possible. Also, thank you to all of you who have been such a big part of making Ethereum possible. So today we'll talk about decentralization and basically, what I think is the need to shift from thinking about decentralization in terms of building shiny tech to thinking about decentralization in terms of concrete properties that we're trying to guarantee to users. So to motivate this, I thought we would go back 30 to 40 years in history, right? And so first of all, think about internet enthusiasm in the 1990s. So who here can recognize either the quote or the person who made the quote? Okay, good. I think more people should. So this is the Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace, John Perry Barlow, 1997. A very famous document in the general cypherpunk and internet freedom world. I declare the global social space we are building to be naturally independent of the tyrannies you seek to impose on us. You have no moral right to rule us, nor do you possess any methods of enforcement we have true reason to fear. So this was, of course, the sentiment at the time, and of course, as we know now, it's actually protecting the independence of online global social space is something that is much more difficult than just making a few statements. There definitely are lots of methods of enforcements to worry about, and a lot of the ways that the internet turned out in general ended up being very different from the early types of Web 1.0 visions that happened, right? Both in terms of government control and also in terms of corporate control, right? So Web 1.0, this was the era where everyone would have their own server, where everyone would be completely free as an independent content publisher. Things and people would talk to each other all on an equal level. And then in the next decade, of course, we had Web 2. And Web 2 moved from this open internet to the world of the walled gardens. So let's see what the people building the walled gardens had to say. Who here can recognize either of these characters? Mm-hmm. So second is, I think, one of the co-founders of Twitter. And the first is, of course, Mark Zuckerberg. So Facebook was not originally created to be a company. It was built to accomplish a social mission, to make the world more open and connected. So who here has seen something basically philosophically indistinguishable from that on the marketing copy of a crypto project? Okay, a lot of people. People have, no, this second one is fun, right? People have really gotten comfortable not only sharing more information, and that social norm is something that has evolved over time. Right, so remember the 1990s, the 00s, this was like the peak of this transparency mentality. The world is a peaceful place, everything is going well. Any kind of abuse of power is only going to be localized, and so the solution to abuse of power is to actually have even more transparency further above it so we can shine a light on it, and let's make everything transparent, and if that happens on an equal level, then things will be great. Of course, this did not happen, and I think, of course, now the discussion has moved much more toward the side of privacy being something that's actually really important and necessary. And, of course, the idea of social media as this egalitarian marketplace of ideas, right? Anyone can put their ideas out there, and if they resonate, they can spread like wildfire. So these are, of course, in some ways, things that have been realized, but in some ways, they're also definitely not the properties that the internet has as of today. This is another interesting quote. This is from an article by Philip Walkaway, a very famous one, The Moral Character of Cryptographic Work. I would highly encourage people to read it. the core points that Philip Walkaway makes is basically that people who are working on cryptography really need to more actively think of cryptography as something that has social and moral implications, and something where you actually have to actively think about what the social and moral implications of the thing that you are building are. And in this section of the article, he was basically trying to explain his theory of why a lot of cryptographers did not want to do that, and basically just wanted to say, well, no, we're just geeks, we just do math, other people figure out that stuff. And one of the explanations he gave is technological optimism, right? And basically saying that technology is by default something that is extremely good, which is true. And there's plenty of charts that you can point to show that, while there are downsides of technology, on the whole, the relentless upward march of any single indicator just ends up overshadowing basically all of them. But at the same time, right, that does not come for free. And a lot of the time, good things that happened in technology did not happen automatically. They happened because people recognized that there were things that are wrong and took specific actions to try to fix them. Like the fact that the air in even cities such as even Cairns is breathable is itself the result of specific actions that were taken to deal with earlier problems like pollution. And so the argument that he gave is basically that if you're too much of a technological optimist, then you basically think that good flows almost naturally from the entire category that you're doing, and so the most important thing is to just accelerate, and the magnitude is more important than the direction. So, of course, as we have seen, this often is not the way that things turn out, right? And so now let's get to the question of where we should be thinking about all of these issues in terms of crypto. And I think the argument that I would want to make is that today we're at this inflection point where for probably the first 10 to 15 years of crypto, it was more relatively easy to argue that the most important good is growing the space. And of course, yes, things that are happen in the space that are chaotic. And yes, the internet happens because of porn. And so it's okay if, crypto grows because of all kinds of crazy stuff. And, there's multi-$100 million hacks happening. But now we're at the stage where it's becoming very unambiguous that the space as a whole is not an underdog upstart, right? The space as a whole is something that's very mainstream. It's being endorsed by major corporations. It's being endorsed by major political figures. And so when we're at that point, growing that space, or at least growing the fraction of humanity that it represents, is not a clear automatic good by default, right? And the thing that is the good is actually making sure that within the context of these tools, we're actually building the right kind of thing. And so I would argue that today, I think we have been seeing this shift, but we need more of a philosophical shift from saying build with blockchains, build with ZK, build with FHE, build with whatever, to saying build in a way that accomplishes particular properties. And often, the most important thing is not being more clever at nerd problems, right? Often, the difference between a good solution and a bad solution is not the nerd problem. It's not what fancy math you can make. It's not, can you figure out a way to do this really clever thing in analog n time? But it's often something that's much more simple and both kind of simple and tricky at the same time. So basically, level 1, we're decentralized because we have the top decentralization KOLs as advisors. Level 2, we're decentralized because we use decentralized tech. Level 3, we're decentralized because we make our users free. So if you're building something, the first question to ask is, are you making your users free? So we could go through some specific examples, right? So one of them is layer 2s, DEXs, other types of applications that have sketchy properties, right? So this is a thing that's happened in the space for the last few years, and the L2 Beat crew just deserves a huge shout out for just being amazingly on the ball for just continuing to create accountability on all of this, right? Basically, yeah, when you have an L2, like you can call whatever you want an L2, right? So, 10 years ago, in Estonia, they had a thing that they described as being a blockchain. And what they basically did is like they took their digitized government records and like every day they made a hash of it. And then they published the hash on their website and I think in a couple of newspapers somewhere, right? And at the time, this was revolutionary. This is like, yay, this is an enterprise blockchain use case, right? But then the question you want to ask is, well, was there even any specific person who actually like went through that pathway and like actually benefited from the trust guarantee that this created, right? And like quite possibly the answer is not necessarily, right? And so here what we see is there's a lot of instances of layer 2s, financial projects, all kind of projects where they basically have instant backdoor buttons, or still at stage 0, or claim to be something like stage 1, but actually are not stage 1, or that have upgrade buttons where the upgrade button can happen instantly and there's no way of stopping it, where there's no exit window. And if you do these kinds of things, then theoretically, in terms of technology, you're building on-chain, but practically, in terms of properties, like it doesn't actually end up being much better than a server, right? And so if you're building something where you're not comfortable making it decentralized, then quite possibly the answer actually should just be to make it a server. Example 2, DApp interfaces, right? So this is something that we've actually seen as our latest over the last like half year or so, right? So basically, you can have amazing formally verified contracts. You have your smart contract that's only a few hundred lines of code. You have like 10 auditors. You have fancy auditor KOLs from 9 continents, including 2 on Mars that managed to figure out that the thing has no bugs in it. Then you have formal verification from companies on the other 5 continents to figure out that everything is safe. And then it's like all perfect, right? But the front end that everyone uses is replaceable by hacking the server, right? And so if you have a design like that, right, a design where the back end is like theoretically super awesome, but the front end is a house full of straw, then an attacker is not going to attack your reinforced steel door. They're just going to move 1 meter to the left, and they're going to attack the straw, and the wolf knocks the house down, and the pig still gets eaten. So the solution to this is basically, static HTML pages, doing versioning directly on IPFS, creating ways for users to directly access web pages through IPFS, and also more advanced solutions. So OK Contract is one that I know people have been working on, creating like more specialized and more restricted ways of doing interfaces. I know that there are other interesting projects doing things like this, whether in RISC-V or in other languages. So basically, once your smart contract is perfect, like the DApp interface just has to actually be something that we focus on, right? Example 3, governance attacks, right? So if we talk about governance and decentralization and the underlying goals of protocols being governed in a decentralized way, right? There's this kind of paradox where there's sort of the approved standardized way of doing governance, which is basically a token holding DAO, and then it makes proposals and everyone votes on the proposals. But then actually, like, we've seen that approach fraying more and more over time, and we've seen that approach, even if it's theoretically decentralized at the L1, it ends up like structurally leading to centralization, right? And so if it structurally leads to centralization, in this case, you have things like lobby that basically turn votes into auctions, which just completely changes the underlying logic of the mechanism when you can go and buy decisions. So governance is something where you don't just need to think about the formal rules being decentralized. You need to think about whether or not it's enabling outcomes that are decentralized. Example 4, ZK identity, right? So This one is interesting. I mean, I'm sure some of you have seen this. This meme was from a post that I wrote last week on the subject, right? And basically, in this case, the argument is, well, okay, so you have zero knowledge proofs, and you're using zero knowledge proofs on top of an identity system, right? And if you use zero knowledge proofs on an identity system, then this is great, and you have privacy. And, you can prove that you have an identity without revealing which one, and these things are all amazing, right? But then the question is, well, do you really have privacy, right? And actually, there are situations where the privacy that you get from a ZK is easy to overrate, and the loss of privacy that you get from enforcing a stricter one-per-person property is actually the thing that's easy to underrate, right? And so basically, if everyone knows that each person is limited to having exactly one account, that even if anything is ZK'd by default, well, anyone can just coerce you into revealing your master key, and if they force you to reveal your master key, then they can see every single thing that you've done, right? And there's even kind of default pathways through which this happens, right? So there's this common user interface workflow of like signing in with an application, sign in with Google, sign in with Farcaster, sign in with whatever. And the problem is that in that workflow, it's kind of inherent that you're giving one application the ability to see your state from other applications, right? And so there's a difference between basically saying, we have something which has zero knowledge proofs inside of the process, and saying we have something which is actually doing a good job of making our users free. Example 5 is privacy. So who here has used a privacy protocol in the last 30 days? Tornado Cash, Railway, Privacy Pools, Monero, Zcash? Okay, so out of those people who have used a privacy protocol, how many of you have made sure that when you were using that protocol, all your privacy wasn't just getting leaked anyway through a centralized RPC provider? Okay, I see one very brave hand up on the right, so amazing job there. So privacy is, again, something where we need to move away from this mentality where the success condition is building amazing gadgets to this mentality where privacy is not a feature that's being added, rather data leaks are a bug that is being reduced, right? And data leaks can happen in many places. Data leaks can happen when you write to the chain, so when you send transactions. Data leaks can also happen when you read from the chain, so RPC calls. Data leaks can also happen on the IP level. So if you do a send raw transaction, even if it's through something fully decentralized, if an attacker takes over a large portion of the peer-to-peer layer of the network, they would still be able to see which IP things came from, right? So privacy also is something that we want to really look at much more holistically, right? So these are kind of some of these examples to watch out for, right? And so then the question is, well, what are ways to think about what are the ideal types of things that we should be trying to build towards, right? So a few tests. So one of my favorite tests, and I have to credit Lira Siri for this one. This is the Walkaway test. Basically, if your company and all of its servers suddenly disappear, do your users still have their assets, right? Now, this is like the most baseline thing that you should be trying to get out of your assets being on chain instead of your assets being on a server, right? So right now we have a lot of projects that are coming up, and they have assets that are they're coming up and they're coming on chain, and they also are increasingly actually trying to serve mainstream users, which means serving users that don't already have Ethereum accounts. And so the question basically is, well, what actual property is that user getting from being on chain that user would not get if the whole thing was being done on a server, right? And the most basic property should be, if the company disappears, the user's assets are still safe, right? Now, how many providers actually do this, right? I think, how many people here know, right? This is a question we should be asking, right? So Actually, yeah, quite a few do a good job, right? So, like the Privy embedded wallet, for example, it actually has the ability to export your key and put it into another wallet, which is a really valuable and important feature. So, like props for that. So, there are a lot of like individual wallets and even individual applications that do a good job of this. Another example of this here is Farcaster, where the Warpcast, or I guess they're now called the Farcaster client, has an option for you to set the backup to be whatever address you want, and by doing that, you effectively you can have your Ethereum account be the root of your identity instead of something that's controlled by a Farcaster system, and so you're able to permissionlessly jump around between different clients. So these things are all good. So basically, there's a lot of things in the ecosystem that do actually pass the walkaway test, right? And if they do, then like this is amazing. And the reason why this is amazing is because they're fulfilling the goal of decentralization, not just as a thing that they say they have because they are on chain, but actually as a thing where you can point to a specific concrete user story that a user is able to do and benefit from because the thing is decentralized that would not exist if the thing was not decentralized. More challenging one, insider attack test. If someone hacks your company, or an employee goes rogue, or you go rogue, how much damage can they do? So the UI layer is one of these very natural points of this, right? But there's also other points. There is upgrades. Can your contract be instantly upgraded? Then, can the UI get hacked? Can the Oracle get, like, how difficult is it to corrupt the Oracle? Or can the top 5 holders of the governance token that make up 55% of the supply force through a decision that just grabs up all of your assets, right? So this is another thing where, again, a lot of projects in the ecosystem, I think, have been doing a great job of seriously thinking about these issues, but it's something that we really need to insist on much more as a first-class property. Trusted computing base. How many lines of code are you trusting not to rug you, right? So the fewer lines of code you're trusting, the more secure you are. Now, it's okay to have 2 million lines of code if those 2 million lines of code are lines of code where they're not actually trusted, right? And if they do something that has a bug, then there's other code that actually denies it the permission to do anything serious, right? And for example, the browser does a good job of forcing separation between HTML and CSS and JavaScript to make sure that actually only the JavaScript part is trusted, right? So there's a lot of different ways to reduce this, right? But basically, if the trusted computing base is too large for anyone to practically inspect, then even if the thing is trustless in theory, it's not trustless in practice. And then finally, another one, analyze the properties of the game, right? And I think this is kind of the most subtle one, and this is the one that I think connects the most to some of the examples that I gave earlier on, right? Which is basically, does the game that you're creating, even if it's credibly neutral in some formal sense, unavoidably lead to some kind of abuse or some kind of excess market concentration? So Web 1 turned into Web 2. And that was not primarily because of anything that was centralized in the rules of Web 1, but rather because Web 1 created an environment where by far the easiest way to do certain things was the centralized way, and centralized players got network effects. They had incentives to create walled gardens, and then the biggest ones won. And then even though email is theoretically an open protocol, in practice, if you don't use Gmail or one of the 2 or 4 other big ones, then you have a very hard time. So there's equivalence of this in the crypto space. There is equivalence of this in crypto projects. So, for example, if you think about the problem of how to do data backups, if you don't provide a good decentralization-friendly way of doing backups, then either your users are going to constantly lose all their data, or things will drift toward a centralized solution, and then they're not actually getting the benefits, right? And so basically not just thinking about the decentralization properties of the thing itself, but also thinking about the decentralization, fairness, market concentration properties of the game that is being created by the protocol. And like this applies to Ethereum itself, right? Ethereum needs to think about staking. Ethereum needs to think about like DEXs and different types of transaction sending economics. It applies to applications on top of it. It applies to every layer. So one other interesting example to think about here is learning from the successes and the failures of Android, right? Who here has an Android phone? Okay. Now, Android is Linux. Thanks to Android, Linux has mass consumer adoption, right? Who here has some kind of Linux that's not Android? Okay. See, actually quite a few, which is good, but in Android, Android has done a lot for mass consumer adoption, right? Actually, yeah, I mean, more recently, other Linuxes are starting to succeed, and I think both as developer platforms and increasingly as gaming platforms, which is like really cool to see. But we could ask the question, has Android made users more free? Has Android made users more safe, right? These are things that free open source software is supposed to try to do. And I think the answer is, well, sort of yes, sort of no, right? So if you have an iPhone, you do not have the freedom to install an application without going through the App Store and without, the overlord Apple and like getting the 30% cut. And, recently, yeah, of course, that was, knocked down by some legal decisions to some degree, but the whole point of open source software should be to try to like actually make these things fair at a very low technical level, right? On Android, if you don't like the Google Play Store, you can install whatever you want as an APK. So it has kind of made users more free. But also, the default Android phone that most people buy is one that has lots of vendor crapware installed. It has a bunch of spyware. It's, in some cases, designed for security. In some cases, it's very not designed for security. And it's an ecosystem that's like very inconsistent in those regards, right? And so I think Linux is this really interesting case study to look at, right? Basically, a lot of the early motivation was basically ensuring that the mobile software ecosystem is as free as possible, and it succeeded in some ways, and it also did not succeed in other ways. And I think as a crypto ecosystem, right? First, we don't just want to succeed. We want to be something that is worthy of succeeding, right? We want to be something where the next generation can look at it and they can say, yes, this is something that actually is bringing openness and freedom and fair permissionless access to the masses, and is not just yet another interest group of people who have a thing that goes up in value that are trying to make their thing go up in value more, right? I think if we lose that, then Ethereum inevitably just becomes a generational thing, and then it inevitably just passes just like a lot of other things have passed before, right? And so when we build these things, we have to put ourselves in the shoes of who we were when we first decided to join Ethereum, and we were not yet convinced that this is the ecosystem to be contributing to, right? Like, what kind of properties actually made us interested in going here instead of going in in other directions in the first place, right? And so if you kind of can't, basically imagine, what kind of an ecosystem would it be that would actually motivate someone who does not yet have the bias of, having ETH, having social connections, and so on, to also want to make the decision to come in and become part of this community. Then, we will have made something that's actually lasting and that's actually really capable of making the kind of more free and more open economy that we all wants to see. So also a social answer, right? I think this one's important. Don't give yourself or your grantees perverse financial or social incentives, right? This is one of those things that I think is also really important to talk about, right? Because if you start analyzing like some of the ways in which things like Web 2 and even things like Web 1 and parts of crypto itself end up going in a more corporatized direction, often it ends up starting with very well-meaning people, but then those well-meaning people over time form into an entity, and then once there's an entity, that entity has incentives, and then once that entity has incentives, it starts having connections to other entities, and then you have friends, you have connections, you have people you don't want to offend, and like that ends up being a big force in itself, right? And like that's also something that like we just do needs to be very mindful of, right? Because ultimately your incentives and your social environments do have a heavy influence on you, and this is something that is extremely difficult to control. So it's important to think about not just like the things that the ecosystem does directly, but also what kinds of like how the ecosystem rewards things, how the ecosystem funds things, and having more models for that, having more models that allow projects to be financially successful, but at the same time ensuring that things like open source, open standards, security, privacy, censorship resistance continue to be taken into account at every step of the way. And, we don't go down the path of OpenAI where you first give up openness for safety and then you give up safety in order to grow faster. Then, like, we can actually make sure that we're going to be a better ecosystem. So I think, how do we do these things? There is no one single answer, right? But there's a collection of a lot of smaller answers, right? And I think to me, this social answer is one big part of the answer, and the other big answer is like the technical answer, right? Which is basically thinking about not building technology, but thinking about building things that have properties. And earlier on in Ethereum's history, like building technology is the right thing to do, right? Like, okay, so who here remembers like decentralized Uber in 2015, right? So it was fun, right? Who here took a ride on a decentralized Uber in 2015? So, okay, I see one person bravely raising their hand. That's good. So, when you were building decentralized Uber in 2015, I think it was like obvious to everyone that the version of the software that was being written, it was like basically a toy and it was not going anywhere, right? The project would go somewhere, but like, come on, you totally have to rewrite the code. We'd have to rewrite the L1 that the code runs on. You'd have to rewrite a bunch of details about the logic. And really, the whole thing was this like really beautiful experimental grounds to just try lots of different and really cool things, right? Now, in 2025, when people are building decentralized Ubers on Ethereum, the goal of the decentralized Uber is to like actually get used by people, right? And so here, like we actually need to think not just about kind of progressing our branch of the amazing shiny tech tree, but also like actually think about what kinds of properties we're trying to achieve. What are the specific things that we give to our users from a decentralized system that we would not be able to give them in the context of a decentralized system, and like actually building the infrastructure and building the layers of the stack with that in mind. And I think this is something that we've made a lot of moves toward, but I think this is something that we can continue to do much further. So thank you. Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.